I'm going to fold the last question into sort of a final remarks if you have any last thing to say, right? So one, and I think we have actually touched on this, so feel free to spin your response however you'd like. But given the recent resurgence of interest in community designs, we're talking about it a lot more, and the challenges faced by well-known centers, we sort of heard a little bit about the closing of Hester Street, and there's others. What do you think success in community design looks like? Maybe here in Harlem, communities of color, other neighborhoods you might be familiar with. And then sort of what your final thoughts might be on what just urban futures look like within community design, and how do we ensure that these designs promote equity and inclusivity in our communities moving forward?
It's a tough question to answer in a sense, because looking at just futures, to me, it is having the ability to truly engage with community stakeholders to discuss in depth the issue or issues that you want to advance, and to shape a policy approach for how you want it to advance. The problem then is ensuring that it is implemented. And if you don't know, community boards are advisory. So, for example, if we are charged by both the Department of City Planning and the Economic Development Corporation to do a deep dive into the inward rezoning and to give detailed responses to how we would not only like to see the rezoning shaped, but also other economic investments that would go along with that, and you put together the equivalent of a 12-page policy paper, which is the resolution that is passed by the community board and one of the land use staff at the city council. It's one of the best resolutions they've ever seen dealing with the issue, that then doesn't get implemented. So the resolution/policy paper may outline a vision for a just future, but it's in someone else's hands to take that recommendation and make it real.
I think the problem is Community Design Center. I've just got a huge problem with the word design, not in the sense that it isn't something that's real and something that has to be considered, but design implies a lot of things. And one of the things that we know, for instance, you mentioned trying to transition from Community Design Center to fee-for-services. In both cases, the level of financial naivete, financial unsophistication, and lack of the right type of skills dooms both of those propositions. And so that's why I'm kind of stuck on, we've got to move this thing towards community development centers. And you could also even add the word research, community research and development, and centering it on the university or connecting it with the university. So I'm still at the point of believing that we're in the process now of a course correction, so to speak. I sort of predict as well as advocate an already ongoing course correction in which there are a lot of things that just weren't possible to be done for communities, or certainly black communities, and to a certain extent Latin communities, to be done prior to the 64-65 Civil Rights Act. And we're just now getting around to really understanding what can be done given those two. Now, if those two things can hold, I think that despite today's situation, there's a bright future. But bottom line is, you gotta come to terms with this word design and how it's throwing things off, especially in today's time, and in information technology, artificial intelligence, et cetera, and so on. All of that easily fits and can work in the Community Development Corporation context. Okay, I'm going to let it go with that.
Thank you. Thank you. That was great. Somebody's passing the mic. Fantastic. Thank you.
So this is for Mr. Benjamin. So as a person who has been through that process with community boards of spending months planning a community rezoning plan or a community development plan, which is just advisory, do you think we need to be at a point where legislatively we change the role of community boards so that the voice of the community is actually heard and is more substantially part of the decision-making process?
Legislatively, I don't know if the powers that be would be interested in doing that, because that is giving the community boards power akin to the city council and everything. But that said, one of the things that we are very mindful of is that decision making is political.
Yes.
And it's not just a matter of saying, okay, this is the resolution that we've passed, but there are elected officials who represent the community. We make sure they get our resolution, but then we follow up with them saying, what are you doing to advance it? And some of the elected officials are very good about asking the community board before they vote on something, what do you think about it? I remember when there was a particular issue of creating a historic district, actually in the area where I live. Robert Jackson at the time was the city council person, and I asked him, did he support it? He said, no. Do you support it? Does the community board support it? Not every elected official necessarily takes that approach of, what do you think? But, whether it is affordable housing or rezoning or, resiliency, the decision making is political. The community boards need to engage with the elected officials who are part of that political process. Also, if you look at some of the community benefits agreements, which are legally not enforceable. However, the city council, in their approval, they can take the community board requirements and they can put it in the legislation, and that is enforceable. With the Board of Standards and Appeals, if they're granting, a special permit, they can add those requirements to the special permit. So you need to know the political levers and to use them.
I had a question to the panelists of, you've talked about, the role of philanthropic organizations in ARCH and its development, and then also kind of on the contemporary level, foundations and the role that they're playing. I wonder if you could speak specifically to the role of Black wealth in these Black wealth, the wealth that Black persons have, and how what is the responsibility, if you see a responsibility, and what is the accountability to those who have generated wealth either from the philanthropic side or from the for-profit side to be engaged, and what should that engagement look like in your view?
This is, I'm maybe not to answer your question, but just to put a fact on the table, which I think is important to remember, which is that Darren Walker, who's been the dynamo director of the Ford Foundation for the last 5 or 6 years, was the chief financial officer of Abyssinian in its kind of Abyssinian Development Corporation in its kind of period of most robust development in the 90s, and so I think that is maybe just another traceable line we can draw. I'm not ready to answer your question yet, but I want to at least point that out because I think it's not something that's mentioned much in the celebration of him and the work he's done. But clearly, that experience shaped his view in the world, and maybe somewhat answers your question in terms of him being a power player in the allocation of money, and clearly influenced by that experience in ways that maybe haven't quite reverberated in terms of community development corporations and community design centers, but certainly reflect some of his priorities as a person who allocates. I think I need to think more about the question beyond that, though.
But black wealth could be used by developers who had the same philosophies that we're talking about now. It's a choice, and maybe it's something that they don't know that they have the power to do. You know, that if you have money, and if your understanding of what's required in a community is something that you're not seeing served, there's nothing, I think, to stop you from becoming a developer, but just a developer with a different vision and a heart, you know? But I think that person actually has probably more possibilities to create the kind of community development, to participate in the kind of community development that they want, and that I think is sort of what we're talking about. So, I mean, I don't think you're banned from participating or figuring out how to do it just because you're wealthy. Welcome.
I can talk now? Okay. I find that in this panel, I'm here, over this side.
Over here.
Nothing has been discussed about education. I also served on the community board now 15 years, chaired a number of committees. Me and Yvonne led the West 125th Street rezoning for the community board. One of the things I'm not hearing is that we need new models. Not design centers, not these community centers that you're talking about, but we need new models, because average people do not understand this at all. They don't know what to ask for. They don't know what the issues are. They're being placed in awkward situations where they're being told, tell us what you want, but they don't know what they want. And we need to help people understand what conditions are going on around them, which are constantly changing now due to climate change, and help them to move forward. Prime example, Tom Lunke, your former colleague, did Zoning 101 when we were dealing with the 125th Street rezoning. Over 200 people, East, Central, West Harlem, went once a week to learn about rezoning so that we could prepare for the vote for the rezoning. It didn't go exactly the way we wanted to, but at least we took the time, the effort to educate ourselves to understand it. So where do we go now when it comes to education to help average residents across New York City understand what we're dealing with? Because when January 20th comes, if you thought there was a problem, you're going to experience a real problem. No money, no support, no help. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, that was great. I want to just chime in a little bit, and then so that people can sort of think about their responses. So you are 100% correct. We did not touch on that. And it is extremely important, and that's, I think, the sort of the future, right? Not even the future, it's current, but it's really something we have to think about and figure out in the next 30 days. So maybe we can talk about that during lunch. But I will say, I have found some of the tools that the Center for Urban Pedagogy, if anybody's familiar, Center for Urban Pedagogy CUP, they have some really great tools that have been able to sort of describe some of the concepts of like ULURP or zoning. Like if you can describe it to a 5-year-old, everybody can understand it, right? And the graphics are really clear, right? Because I think one of the things we can do as architects and designers is we have the ability to sort of visualize some of these things, right? So I reference them a lot. So if anybody is not familiar, I encourage you to check them out. The other sort of related to new models is, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Made in Brownsville, but which I think now is a youth design center, but there are groups doing some really interesting things. A lot of young architects coming out of school that haven't found their place, that are starting their own sort of it's sort of like a compilation of a series of different things, and I don't think there's one specific model for it, but there's some really interesting things coming out. So maybe that is something we can provide some resources to people who've registered, like later on for people who want to find more information, but we need a lot more of that. So thank you for bringing that up. And then I don't know if anybody wants to.
Well, I think just in terms of what you're saying about the community boards, when community boards have input of architects and planners, it makes it at least something that can be explained to the entire board more easily. And there have been moves, like with the AIA, to try to encourage architects to participate, because the questions that you are maybe looking for answers to are things that relate to architects. I mean, what architects would know. And I, when I worked, when I was at the community board for like 7 or 8 years, part of what I did was to explain before we did votes what the options were, and to explain that we didn't have to go this way because this developer says this. And I think that when that input is missing, that's not a good situation. But I'm sure there are other ways to also do that. But it just seems that the community board is there, and that there must be a way to transmit education about the kinds of things that you're voting on that they need.
And I have also found that a lot of the environmental justice groups in communities are doing a lot of this work. And so if we had more architects at the table with some of these environmental justice groups, I feel like there could be really amazing. Uprose and did some really amazing advocacy work in Sunset Park. We Act for Environmental Justice has done a series of different things, but a lot of these environmental justice groups are mobilizing really fast. So it'd be interesting to see how they are working with or collaborating with some of the other sort of design groups to make stronger coalitions.
I might just add in terms of Arch's approach, it's true we didn't talk about education too explicitly, but I will say one of the important things about a group like Arch was that it was not, it wasn't ultimately only reactive, it wasn't reflexive, it didn't just respond to something that was given to it, it was also about projection, about giving a community the power to imagine its future, and that is a very different kind of engagement with development than just reaction or, and I think what Roberta and Wayne are describing is a process in which people are handed something and then they have to react to it, and the realm of possibilities is on the table. Arch was really interested in kind of thinking on a longer term, a longer time scale, and East Harlem Triangle implemented a lot of the things in their plan. Maybe they look a little different than they imagined, but they did it. But it took 25, 30 years. It was a very long time, but having the plan was for them really empowering.
Yeah, but also to what Roberta said, I mean, community boards have the ability, and to some extent, if they're doing their job, actually provide that type of education that we're discussing. I mean, as I mentioned, when we did the inward rezoning, we didn't meet for 18 months just to meet. I mean, there were aspects of what the rezoning meant, what contextual zoning meant, that were discussed. Separate and apart from a specific rezoning, I mean, there are, through the borough president's office and through city planning, this kind of the, zoning 101 and advanced zoning 101 training that's given to community board members, but we've also asked for those presentations to be given at some of our committee meetings so that members of the public understand, what these terms mean and how it impacts what we're talking about. When we get to a particular project, it is not the first time that we've talked about the Board of Standards and Appeals and what it does and what we're doing. Depending upon who is in office, at the borough president's office or the city council, there is more or less attention or support to that kind of education. but the access to the information is there, and if the community board, once again, is doing its job at those monthly meetings, and we meet every month except for, you know, July and August when we're on break, that information can be shared.
Listen up, team. When I look around this room, I see a fighting team of brave antibodies. But the flu is coming in strong, so I won't sugarcoat it. I need each one of you on your A game. The good news is, Anthony, the human body we've been tasked to protect, just got his flu shot, which supplied us with brand new gear to defend against the flu. That's right, we've upgraded our game with this new equipment. They give you a little extra boost. So let's go fight for Anthony, for his mom, his co-workers, that nice lady Patricia that lives down the street with the cute dog. In the face of viral adversity, we make Anthony thrive so he can protect himself and the people he loves most. Are you with me? Yeah!
Let's work as a team to defend against the flu. Gear up with a flu shot to help protect others and reduce your risk of being sick or hospitalized with the flu. Learn more at getmyflushot.org.
I think we have, well, we are at time, but if Marta, do you want to take the last question? Or?
Yeah. Firstly, I want to thank you all. This has been a pretty insightful discussion. I mean, firstly, I want to kind of make a quick statement, and then I'll get into my question. Clearly, architecture is a very political act, right? Like, as shown here, as your discussion kind of illustrates, the two are kind of inseparable, right? But it would seem that part of the profession distances itself from community, from politics. And my question is, you know, moving forward, how do we kind of, I don't want to say forcefully, but bake politics or the understanding that this is kind of a very visceral thing that we're working on, right? How we further improve on that understanding and just improve the situation of our communities, of our cities across the country, not only Harlem. Harlem is kind of a good sparking ground for this, but how do we move this at a larger urban scale?
I mentioned that when I was in graduate school, there were these conversations typically coming from staff, you know, and pointed at the dual degree students, and it was focused on what is the role of the architect. And so if the profession sees the role of the architect in the very traditional sense where you're working for a client, the client is giving you the program and you are executing their program, then you're not going to get the kind of political and community, you know, engagement that we're talking about. You know, if the education of architects, you know, takes the direction, you know, that when I was in graduate school we got from being in, you know, both the Department of Architecture and Department of Planning, where you're looking at architecture in a much broader context. You're looking at it from the perspective of social services and from development. Then you realize that if you have what you conceive to be good design or planning ideas, if you're not at the table with the ability to push for those to be implemented, those ideas are meaningless. So I think it goes back to how architects are educated, but also how the profession embraces or doesn't embrace that sort of dual role of the architect.
So just, Marta, do you want to?
Yeah,
I will respond to you specifically later. I'm just letting you know.
So I did want to echo Mo's thanks for a wonderful panel, and I have many questions which I will ask, particularly about the relationship of community design centers and community development corporations and their particular history in northern Manhattan. But the question I'd like perhaps the panel to think of as a whole is, and Mr. Mitchell alluded to this in his comments, is what is the role of the university in supporting community design? And here we are, at City College, right? And here we are with the J. Maxbond Center for Urban Futures situated and active in our school. So where we think, we have my colleague Jack Travis from Pratt, where we know the Pratt Community Design Center has thrived for in various forms a long time. But in my role as dean, I know so much that the success of these endeavors depends on funding. So echoing Milton Curry's comment, if the university is to advance community design, where is the money going to come from?
Hey!
And how do we make it happen? So.
Yep. And we're not going to get it.
Again,
It's a plea for help.
again, I think you're going to have to, well, I don't think I'm in the atmosphere where this is going to be receptive, but you're just going to have to rethink that word design. It doesn't communicate. You're just going to have to rethink that word. But you do put your hands on the issue, and that is, and I alluded to it earlier, and that is the university, the whole university, as well as as this architecture and planning and other entities that are dealing with the built environment, because that lady posed a really big issue and big question, and I'm not sure that this is quite the form of be able to deal with it, but that's the only thing that really matters right now.
Okay, great. So I think we are at time and we have a lunch break. I wanted to take a second to thank all the panelists. Can we give them a round of applause? Great, thank you so much. I'll turn it over to...
A quick announcement. So we do have a quick lunch, not a quick lunch break, we have a lunch break until 1:30. We have light refreshments in the lobby if anyone would like to make a meal of that. We also have some recommendations in the back of the program if you're not familiar with the neighborhood of some restaurants around. And we look forward to seeing you back here at 1:30 for our afternoon session. We'll be starting with our panel, Housing Harlem. And we're excited to continue the day together. Thank you so much.